there are a lot of pressing questions that we all have, and this has been something on our minds for a long time, to talk to entertainment lawyers and really get the ins and outs of the contract and agreements and all the things that we really need to know about. So thank you for being here. And thanks everybody for joining us on a Friday evening. Some of you probably are pretty late since we're on the West Coast. We're early. So thanks for spending your Friday night with us. If you want to watch this again, you'll be able to do so next week on Pro Tips and Tricks, along with all of our other conversations that we've had over the last several months. Please check it out. There's a lot of great content on there.
Hello, I'm Scott. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We've had a little bit of a time off between Zoom meetings, but this is one I've been excited about. First off, I work on bringing all sorts of fun outside organizations to be part of the ISA greater family, all the different contests and whatnot, consultants and classes you can take. And I do all the video editing. So Somali was mentioning Pro Tips and Tricks, and we also have a YouTube page, which you might as well go ahead and sign up or subscribe to it since it's free, and ring the bell. You'll know whenever we post anything new, including these. But yeah, our Pro Tips and Tricks page, I will put the link in the comments here. But also, I've been with the company for over 4 years now, and I spent the first 2 involved with the writing gigs. And so I was able to speak a lot with writers and production companies as they were hosting gigs or submitting to gigs, and people inherently are untrustworthy of people that they don't know working together. And so I would tell everybody, whether it was the writer or the production company, that, hey, make a contract, just write it out. It doesn't even have to necessarily go through a law firm or anything, but just don't be afraid to ask to have things in writing, because then at least you're on the same page. And I think there can be timidness, like an awkwardness about how to do that. So I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of detail, but I always want to preach that, because it's just always good to make sure that you're always on the same page when you're working together, whether it's co-writers or a writer production company.
Hey everybody, I'm Craig James, the founder of the ISA. I want to welcome Scott and Minda. This is one of those conversations I think is, like Scott said and Mai said, it's hugely important. I would urge you to, when you are writing up contracts, definitely speak to an attorney. I think it's a good idea to make sure that you do have that, get the right advice, but do protect yourself. And that's really, really important. I think they're going to get into all that, so I don't really need to get into it. But I do think this is one of those things that I've learned a lot about over the last few years, having started the ISA, and then the language that we've added to our site. It's so important to be informed, and that's why we're having this conversation. So take notes, but again, like Scott said, it's going to be repeated later. So really great, valuable information you're going to get today. I also want to talk about quickly just general mental health, which is a total segue. We're all feeling still the pressure of the pandemic and the protests and all that's been going on in the world. Continue to care for yourself as much as you possibly can. Like, speak to friends, speak to family, get yourself into a place where don't force yourself to write. We've said this for a while now. If you're not ready to write, don't write. Write when you feel like you're in a good place to write. It's really critical to focus on your mental health and make sure that you're feeling at peace with where we're at in the world, because there's a lot of pressure. And don't feel like you have to handle that all on your own. Get into a chat with the ISA members, find some other friends, make some new friends, anything you can to just be in a really find peace with what's going on in the world, so that you're writing, because your greatest writing to me will come from being in a peaceful place. Some say that you got to be tortured. I believe that all the torture happened. Then when you get to a peaceful place, you can look at it and tell your stories from the most creative place ever. So encourage you to, again, just focus on your mental health as much as possible.
Hi, everybody. I am Shayna Weber. I'm the manager of production and research at ISA, and I'm hosting some of these awesome conversations that we're having today. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Scott Goldman and Minda. It's Crado, right? Crado. First thing that I want to do with you guys is just let you give a brief, like who you are and what your specialty is. And then we'll just kind of dive into some questions. So Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure. It's great to be here. I can't all see you, but I see on the bottom of the screen that there's many people there, so I assume you're all there. I have kind of a unique background in the sense that I was a development executive for a number of years, producing mostly television movies to start, and then features under my own company. And I mostly did producing, and also had experience as a writer after being a development executive, and continued that even through, actually produced two movies during law school, which I wouldn't recommend, but so I have a lot of experience from that creative side of the fence, and so I understand a lot of what it feels like to be a writer, and a lot of the experiences that I've had from the writing side and the producing side, it kind of informs my legal side, just through all those unique experiences that you have only in the entertainment industry. And I've been at Frankfurt Kurnit for over 4 years, and I specialize in mostly scripted features and television. I also do a wide range of kinds of option purchase deals, like from books, and foreign rights deals, for foreign films, podcast deals. I do a bunch of unscripted work as well.
Great, thank you. And Minda?
I did not produce any movies during law school. I survived law school, which is enough for me. But I cut my teeth at a company called Film Nation Entertainment, where I primarily worked in sales and entertainment for 2 years. Sales and distribution. Of course, it was entertainment. And then after that, I jumped ship and went to Frankfurt Kurnit to work with Scott and a bunch of other really great attorneys, and I've been there for about a year. I primarily represent writers, directors, producers, independent film financiers, and distribution companies as well. And I do almost the same things that Scott does. I work with option purchase agreements, negotiate deals for writers, and pretty much anything they throw at me, which is both fun and challenging. It's really good work.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for being here. Is there any sort of disclaimer that you want to say at the beginning of this to the advice that you're giving today? I mean, just so that we set it straight.
Well, I mean, we obviously give our advice, but I think the one caveat is it's always important to know the very specifics of a situation, because there's always nuances. So we'll give obviously the best advice we can, and we'd certainly be willing to help people afterwards if they have specific questions. But a lot of our advice obviously depends on the circumstance.
Sure, exactly. That's exactly what I was getting at. Like, don't, they're going to give the best advice that they can give, but everything is specific in terms of what you have going on. So, okay. So first of all, I mean, let's do the big general question of and we'll just go from the place of a writer. When does a writer need an attorney or entertainment lawyer? When do they need legal help? Is it any contract? Can a writer do anything on their own, or should they always have somebody to help them?
I mean, I think whenever you don't understand something, it's probably a good idea to find someone who does. I mean, I don't like to enter into anything, sign anything or talk about anything with anyone if I don't know what's going on, and it's worth the comfort to maybe get some help on that. But whenever you start collaborating with someone and you want something a little more concrete, set in stone, or someone approaches you with a distribution offer or something, and it's just beyond your ability to do on your own, I think it's worth it to reach out. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think if any time you're doing something where there could be an issue about who controls what, I think that's a time so that would be if you're writing with somebody, if you're going to enter into some kind of agreement, a shopping agreement or an option agreement, it's important I think to have an attorney look that over, because we get a lot of times people come to us when the paperwork is not in place, and a lot of times what happens is the project's just frozen, because if you can't work out a deal, both sides have some interest in the project, And if they can't come to a deal, then you can't move forward with your project, because a buyer, a Netflix or a studio won't move forward with a script if they feel there's confusion as to the rights.
Right. And they probably don't want to deal with that drama anyway, like your own drama over there. Like, get it worked out. Okay, so let's go into options and shopping agreements. And Minda, we'll go to you. What is a shopping agreement? What is an option? Sort of what's the difference, and who would come to you? Who would present that to a writer, like a shopping agreement or an option?
So we'll start with, I guess, a shopping agreement. It's if a party comes to you and wants to develop it or shop it around town or bring it to anybody else, they're going to bring that to you. Or maybe you bring the shopping agreement to someone you think could facilitate that for you in a better way than you might be able to alone. And those people come together and they agree to jointly develop and maybe market a project. And they agree that both parties aren't going to kind of go outside of that relationship and work with anybody else unless they both agree. And then ultimately they're going to use that shopping agreement, hopefully, to reach out to a financier or a buyer or a studio to take the project a little further. And you pre-negotiate how that relationship is going to work when those other third parties come in. And then an option agreement is different in that you have something that someone wants to come in and potentially develop further, and they want to have the exclusive right to do that. So maybe it's a studio or a distributor or someone else too. And the option is just the option to purchase the rights later, to keep going with those rights and do something with those rights.
Okay. Scott, do you want to add into that, or should I carry on?
Laying the groundwork for you.
Typically speaking, one of the big differences between the two is that a shopping agreement is only assigning the right to shop it, not assigning any rights in the project itself. And typically the way these are structured is that there's no payment. It's just you're giving someone the right to shop it, and when you set it up somewhere, or when this other party, say a producer, sets it up somewhere, typically the way it's structured is that each party, you as the writer, the other person as the producer, will separately negotiate their deals, and can't move forward until both parties have made their deal. So the advantage to a shopping agreement is you have more leverage, because you get to make your deal at the time it's set up and maybe take advantage of any leverage you have, because they can't move forward without your deal closing. The downside is you're not getting any money for any option amount. On the option purchase, the advantage is typically you're paid for the option. But the downside is typically all of the fees and anything is pre-negotiated, so that however it sells, you don't have control over what that'll be, what amount that is. You've already negotiated it. And also typically the person who options it has more control over how they're going to shop it and exploit it.
So then is a shopping agreement, should a shopping agreement be a non-exclusive, meaning that you could also continue on with your own, shopping it around while this person is doing it? Or are they generally exclusive, where you can't go out, you're kind of in a relationship with them?
It's typically exclusive. I mean, once in a great while I've dealt with one that's not, but it's very hard to shop anything in this town non-exclusively, because there's overlap, and not a lot of people want to put the effort into a project and send it out somewhere. And then it's very difficult to sell something if you send it to them and say, just be aware, you could, at any point, I may not have the right anymore. It's not really a productive way to shop.
Minda, do you want to add anything, or should I move on to the next question?
I agree. Next
okay.
Question.
So let's talk about options. Can we talk about sort of like the specifics inside of an option of, are there any pitfalls really that say a producer, well, I guess we'll start there. When a producer comes to you with an option agreement as a writer, and what should you be looking for from that company or person? What are some things you should look out for? Should you make sure they have other projects, or do you have any advice on that front?
Well, I think it depends on your goals and what they're approaching, or you're approaching them for, or what you're looking to get out of the relationship. I mean, you want someone established, of course, and someone who has a proven ability to take the project and take it further. And I mean, someone you're comfortable with, someone who creates projects maybe similar to yours, or have created things that you admire. I think it's a really kind of personal choice, determining who you're entering into an agreement with. And someone who is willing to talk about things and negotiate with you and or your attorney, and not someone who's just like, take this and that's it, that's the deal. You don't want to be in a relationship with someone for a year or however long that option is going to last, give or take whatever extensions there are, with someone who's just not really someone you actually want to be in a deal with.
So maybe a red flag to look out for is if they say you need to sign this as is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Everything's negotiable. I don't think there's ever a situation where you can't ask questions or have someone else ask questions on your behalf.
Okay. How long should, or typically is a good option agreement for? Is it a year? Is it 6 months?
Shorter. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, I think, yeah, typically it's in the range of, for a lot of studios, it's typically 1 year to 18 months with another extension period for another year to 18 months. It depending on who the option is, maybe with a smaller company or independent producer, you might want to make it shorter to make sure that, a lot of times when I was on the producing side, producers would just kind of option something really to send it out in the first month. And if they can't find any way to sell it, they'll kind of drop it. And so the more that you can make sure that you understand what the producer plans to do, what their strategy is. And a lot of times making it shorter just puts more, this business moves slow enough as it is. And if you can force the hand of a producer a little bit to move forward more quickly, and because if they have 18 months, they may go a lot slower. But so it depends on what kind of leverage. Sometimes people, for example, they may have a strategy where it just takes more time. If they're putting together financing, or they're trying to find talent, or they're maybe want you to do rewrites on the script, that's going to take a lot more time. So it's more reasonable to have a year or 18 months. But if they feel like the script's ready to go and they just want to go out to buyers, maybe you try to get a shorter amount of time to make sure they move quicker.
Okay. And talk about renewals. So if you sign in your option that they can add a 6 month or a year renewal onto that, so first of all, how long would the renewal be, and how many times should you let it be renewed?
I think that's up to you and how risk averse you are, how long you want your project kind of sitting with one person and not being technically shopped around or shown to anybody else. But like you said, 6 months is probably a good renewal. A year could be an option period renewal too. 1 or 2 is nice, but there could be more. It really just depends on your deal and what you want to do there.
Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of agreements have one extension in them. If you have more than one, what we sometimes try to do is put progress to production provisions in there, meaning what those typically mean is that if you have let's say if you have financing in place, then you can extend it. Or if you attach an actor, sometimes in like book deals, you have to have a finished script before you can move forward. So sometimes you can put in those parameters to make sure that they're not just extending it. Because sometimes if the option fee is low enough, they can just probably extend it, but not really put a lot of, attention behind it.
And if you agree to an extension with a producer, what should a writer do once your option is coming to the end and you're reaching that point where there's the renewal? Typically, is it a writer's responsibility to sort of reach out and make sure that everything's kosher paperwork wise, or is it the producer?
It's the producer's responsibility because no rights are transferred with an option. So when you grant an option to someone, they're just getting an option to keep going or to purchase, and you still keep all those rights. So if they forget or they don't, come and renew, they have nothing and they haven't gained anything. Unless they pay you, it doesn't keep going. But if you wanted to stay with that person, you wanted to be nice and tell them,
remind them, right? And how long are shopping agreements for? Is that kind of the same time frame, roughly?
Yeah, typically, usually between 6 months and 18 months.
Okay. And let's say that an option, I'm going to get to the specifics of options, but this one just came to my head. What if you're at the end of your option and there's talk about doing a new option? Should you, as a writer, think about, I mean, obviously you probably should based on what has happened so far, but is it smart to renegotiate some of the terms if you're doing a new option, or is it smarter to, a lot of times I feel like writers are in that place where they don't want to cause problems. So they're like, well, I'll sign the same thing again. But is that smart? Say if you've gone a year and nothing's happened, but you really do like this producer and they have whatever it is that you're looking for. Should you sign another option or should you try to negotiate some new terms in there?
This is if there's no more option extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. I think this is a tricky one to talk about without specifics, but I think that I understand the feeling with writers not wanting to, create, ruffle feathers, and I certainly was in that position as a writer, and it's difficult. I guess that's kind of our job as attorneys is to do that. But I think, I think you want to, if you feel like the original intention of the option or the original strategy has changed dramatically, then I think a lot of times you need to open that Pandora's box and get, and because if certainly if you started nowadays, because of the way the industry is, a lot of features suddenly become series. That was never the case before, but now series there's so much out there. So you see a lot of feature projects being repurposed as a series. So let's say you have an option deal that was really focused on being a feature, and now they're really focused on it being a series. You want to make sure you maybe renegotiate and make sure you have good deal terms for a series in there. Or if you have leverage and they have suddenly attached big talent, and at the time your option and purchase price was very low, but now you have a big actor attached, well then, and they need to extend it, absolutely you should renegotiate those terms based on the circumstances. And
how much, speaking of that, how much should your option fee be? Because I've heard people say $1 or, does it depend on the producer and what they're doing? Or should it always be high? Should you shoot for high, or what's that number, the magic number there?
I don't think there is one. I mean, I feel like I've seen them all over the place, but no, what do you think, Scott? I've seen so many recently, I don't know what the standard is. They're everywhere.
There is no standard. I mean, I suppose there's definitely spectrums at the studios. Obviously, if you're in a bidding, when we have clients who are in bidding situations, then, we've become very aggressive, and the sky's the limit. I think it's depending on the situation. I mean, there's a balance, right? You obviously, depending on who it is, especially if it's an independent producer, they have limited funds. There are a lot of writers starting out get in these situations where someone wants a free option. And, as a producer and a writer, I was in that situation too. And it's a difficult situation because you're excited about having someone take on your project. That producer's saying all the right things. It sounds exciting. I typically would recommend that even if it's a situation where the producer doesn't have a lot of money, I would typically try to at least get them to pay a nominal fee, maybe a few $100s. Because I think it was a little bit of a red flag that if they just can't put down any money just to say, I'm committed, then I think then you start to have to wonder, like, or a little bit question the commitment. Like I said, it's not the same in every situation, but producers are quite good at saying all the right things at the beginning. But a lot of times, just a little bit of money, even if they say, well, we don't have a lot of development funds, even a little bit of money says something. But typically, we try to get option amounts on the low end, $2,500 for 12 months or 18 months. That's typically on the lower end.
Okay. You already answered this, but a no fee option is just red flag. Like red flag. I should just have a red flag and be like, bloop, red flag. And then how do you determine in an option agreement what the purchase price would be for your script?
It's pretty wide berth for that too. I mean, I guess it depends on the script that's coming in. Like Scott said, if there's a bidding war for this or a lot of interest, if there's an actor attached or director attached already, it could be anywhere maybe for like a book option between 30 to 100K. Some really like a New York Times bestseller might even be more. And then for a script, you know, it's somewhere in there too. And then you might even negotiate different purchase prices for different types of exploitation. So maybe you're negotiating a specific purchase price for theatrical, which is going to be a certain percentage of the budget, 2% I think about, of the ingoing budget of what that feature film might be, or you might do something for a series, or you might pre-negotiate what's going to happen if it goes to a streamer like Netflix, and kind of work out different terms for that, because we just value each type of exploitation differently these days. So it really depends on this project that's being brought to the table, I think.
Okay, and so should you have, say you have a producer and they're not sure as a project if it's something that's say it's a feature right now, but it is something that, like you said before, maybe it turns into a TV. Should you have all of those different options in your option agreement?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, okay.
It's like one of the ways that you can structure something. You could structure just a straight up purchase price for all rights and then determine the value of all those rights and giving them up. Or you can determine it piece by piece.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it lately with all the different platforms popping up everywhere, it makes our jobs a little more challenging these days because there's so many different places you can go, and you know, what Netflix will play is very different than other places, and so on. And if you're going with a series versus a mini series, and all these different situations, and so it's one of the reasons why shopping agreements have become more popular than ever, because it's like, do you want to spend all that time putting together, you know, all the different possibilities? Yeah, I mean, I think depending on a feature versus television has different fees. And one other thing I'll say is that if the company is a WGA, a Writers Guild company, then there's going to be minimums. What can be at the very least, and so that sets a bar for certain amounts.
And what would make somebody not want to go by the WGA rules and the parameters? And is that a red flag you should look out for?
I think that it is a really big problem if they're not a WGA, and the reason is because if you write a script or someone hires you to write a script non-WGA, and then they sell it to a buyer, like any of the major buyers who are WGA signatories, and your script was not written under the WGA, then believe it or not, your script is seen as source material, like a book. It's not eligible for credit. So at the very least, if you're working with a company that is non-WGA, you have to make sure contractually that if they ever set it up with a WGA signatory, they'll retroactively pay you at least the minimum and make it clear that it's under the WGA at that point. And so almost, except for maybe digital, almost all the buyers, meaning like kind of low budget digital projects, all the buyers are WGA signatory. So unless it's going to be like an independent production, and you know it's going to be an independent production that's going to be outside the guilds, you have to be very careful about being outside the WGA.
All right. Mindy, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree.
Nope, good. Okay. So on that sort of track of credit, you just said that it's just a, you know, what if in your option agreement, should you be negotiating your credit, especially if you're not in the WGA?
I like the WGA to apply as if, or I like to include a clause that says the WGA is going to apply as if it applied, because we want it to fall under that situation as much as possible. So whatever you would get if you were WGA, you would get it. And also the WGA is going to be the one determining the credits in the end anyway. So as long as you haven't fallen into that scenario where you've become source material, you are the original creator. It depends on what happens to the script later. If they rewrite it, they're gonna have to figure out a way to credit everybody who rewrites and all of that in whatever way they're going to, but it will work itself out. So. And
for the rewrites, do you put something in your option agreement, in your contract, that you, as the you know, original writer and creator, get first rewrite? I mean, can a producer just take, if they option your script, can they just take it and have somebody else rewrite it?
Sure, yeah. Well, not if they option it. If they purchase it, they can.
Okay.
So once they've purchased all the rights to your script, yes, they can go have someone else write it. But ideally, you will have hired a lawyer to help you out, or you already learned about this fact. But you should always ask for the first opportunity to perform rewrites and see if they'll get that to you, because that is a really important thing to ask for, and we always try to.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, no, that's important too. I agree. That's an important thing to make sure. Under certain circumstances, under the WGA, you do get the first right. But I have to refresh my memory on what situation that is, but in some specific circumstances.
Right.
So if a producer options your script and they want rewrites done immediately, and they haven't purchased, do you, like, as a writer, is it just sort of your personal preference, or should you fight to, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to figure out as we go into these agreements, sometimes producers option something and then they want you to rewrite stuff based on their notes or somebody else's notes, but they haven't purchased it. So what should a writer do in those situations?
Well, they once they've optioned your script, you want to make sure that you are going to do any rewrites after that point. If it's under the WGA, they'd have to pay you at least the minimum for a rewrite. And what you want to make sure in these, without getting into too much details, is now you start to have an interesting bifurcation of the rights.
Mm-hmm.
So you have someone who's now optioned your script, your underlying script, and let's say that they've hired you now to do a rewrite. Well, they own the rewrite because they've paid you as a work for hire for the rewrite, but you own the underlying script if the option ever expires. And it becomes a little cloudy. You kind of don't want someone, they can't do anything without your underlying script. But at the same time, there's this like odd rewrite out there that they own, and some future buyer will get kind of nervous about some rewrite out there that they might inadvertently overlap with. And so what you want to do in a contract like that is to try to make sure that that rewrite reverts back to you, even if you have to repay what they paid you, so that you have all the rights back to everything. And so that's one of the important things why I think having an attorney is important, because there's a lot of things that you may not think about in different, unfortunately as lawyers, we're sort of trained to think about the worst thing that can happen.
Right.
And we try not to live our lives that way, but with contracts, you want to just say, okay, well, what's going to happen if things don't work out? Let's make sure that we're good to move on to another buyer in the future.
Well, that's why you should have somebody, because us as writers are like, yay, everything is great. Life is perfect now. We have this, we need somebody who's like, no, don't do that. Be careful. Okay, so let's go to protecting your work as a writer. Is a WGA registration enough? Should you copyright? Like how should you be protecting your work? And beyond just doing those things, are there other ways to protect your work or to keep track of, where it's going? And
well, I'm like a huge nerd, and I think the coolest thing about United States copyright law is that the minute you take your idea and you like put it on paper, or you have someone act it out on screen, or you do something to make it tangible, it has copyright protection. It exists with copyright protection under the law. The reason people register things with the Copyright Office is because you have to have a registration on file in order to file a claim for copyright infringement that someone stole your work. So even if you forgot to register or never did, you're still okay. It's just you can't go to court over someone potentially taking your work or stealing from it. And then the WGA registration, I think anything that makes you feel comfortable or gives you a peace of mind is worthwhile in this life, especially these days. So if it makes you feel good, you should definitely do it. But it's not anything that gives you any extra protection, like above and beyond copyright registration or anything like that.
One other advantage of I used to do for a few years was a litigator and worked on some copyright cases. One advantage to registering your work is that you get statutory damages, and it helps you. It takes away certain obstacles when you're when you're filing a claim when it comes to damages, assuming it's done before the infringement.
Interesting. Do you think that it helps for a writer to keep a log or track everybody that, now with email and stuff, we're able to, do that better, but is it smart for, I feel like there's the writers that are totally open to sending their stuff out. And then there's some that are super precious about the idea that someone's going to steal your work. How likely is it really that somebody's going to steal your screenplay? And is it common? Then,
This is a tough one. There have definitely been circumstances where stuff has been stolen, and you hear like different advice. I read all these books on screenwriting all the time. I probably read more screenwriting books than actually screenwrite, which is probably not a good thing, but so a lot of times people say, like, be very careful about sharing your idea to too many people. And so I think you want to be protective. Concepts are not copyrightable. Ideas are not copyrightable. So someone can take your idea without infringing any copyright. I think you just want to be smart about who, especially when you're spending a lot of time on a screenplay. I think that the risk is very low that someone's going to go out there and steal it. I think more often what happens is you pitch something and whoever you pitch it to maybe sort of heard, thought of the idea and maybe didn't remember where it was from and sort of decides to develop it. That's happened in the past. I think in general the advice would be just to be careful about who you share your script with and your idea with, just for the sake that it's possible, that someone could take it, but I don't think it's usually very likely to happen.
Minda, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. Trust your gut with the people you're dealing with. If something seems off, it's probably off. But if you're also, I know there's a lot of competitions and you sign these waivers that are like, as soon as you submit your script to, Nichols or any of those competitions, it's out there in the world, and it is. And you have to be comfortable with the fact that many people are going to read it. But there's also benefits to being out there on the blacklist or at any competition, is that people are going to see it and hopefully notice it, or you're going to get really good feedback from the people who have read it. So you're weighing the cost effectiveness of putting it out in the world.
Right.
And it's up to you.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions from our attendees, and I'm going to try to get to a bunch of those because they're all across the board, kind of different questions. And I think that I'll just race through them and we'll just try to get, usually I sometimes have people come up on audio and ask themselves, but I think for the sake of this, just to get as many questions as we can from everybody answered, I'll just ask them. So first of all, Ruth Kaufman, hi Ruth, she's asking, how do we know when we need a film agent versus an attorney or both? And she says, I have my first phone call with a production company soon.
That's a good question. And I know we have a lot of questions, so I'll try to answer as succinctly as possible. They're very different roles. I typically, people have both. I think they both, are important roles. An agent is really out there to procure employment and to sell your script. And does help negotiate the deals, but the attorney more is spearheading that process. So you really want an agent for someone to help you get employment, to get your script out there, to promote you, which is not the attorney role, while the attorney is helping you when you have a deal in place to help you navigate that process.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to go down to Mitch's question. Hi, Mitch. Contracts are project dependent, but in the early stages of our writing careers, what or where is a good resource for standard contracts that we may encounter? Is there any place that a new writer can go to sort of suss out maybe examples of these kinds of contracts, or should they just get an attorney?
Well, I'm always going to say you should get an attorney, because I think you should have the best information you possibly can have from the best resource, even if it's going to cost you, just because I'm a risk-averse person, obviously, because being a lawyer. But there are a couple books, if you wanted to just look at it and see and become a little more familiar. I can't think of any names off the top of my head, but there's like Hollywood Deal Making is a good one. I don't know who wrote it, but it's got a blue cover. The Business of Television, it's got a white cover. Business of Television is a good one too. And then there's a couple books that have just standard forms at the end of their like an appendix. And it's good to read, but again, if you don't have the training of a lawyer, there might be stuff in there that you just don't get or you might not notice. So it's good to get the opinion of a lawyer too.
I just saw someone put a note on about the WGA, which is a good, I think the WGA has some form agreements on there as well.
Yes. Okay, Leslie Bloom is asking, when you sign with an agent, is that the same as a shopping agreement, or do you sign a shopping agreement with your agent separately, or how does that work? So let's just talk about when you sign a contract when you sign up with a manager or an agent, what comes along with that? And should you have an attorney when you do sign with a manager or an agent?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's probably not too much to negotiate, but depends on the agent. That's a shopping agreement is different concept. An agent representation agreement is basically giving someone a right to represent you for a period of time. And a shopping agreement is typically about a particular project that that a producer wants to shop. I mean, in some ways, there's a little bit of crossover that an agent will be shopping your scripts, but not in the same way as a producer.
Right. Let's see. Kimberly Collette is asking, when you're signing a shopping agreement, how does the shopper get paid? That's your shopping agreement. I think you mentioned, Scott, at the beginning that you both negotiate separately with the buyer. Is that correct?
Right. So the way that would work is if you, and I should say, what I mean by setting up a project is that if you're pitching different places, typically what the next step is that, let's say a Netflix, they will put it into development, which is essentially setting it up, saying we're going to now develop the project with the possibility of producing it. And at that point, you will be entering into a deal with Netflix for them to option your script, and eventually maybe purchase it, and maybe writing services as well. And the producer will be entering into a deal to get a producer fee if and when the project is made.
Okay. And Christy Daniels is asking, how much would hiring a lawyer for a shopping agreement or an option typically cost? What are we talking here?
Oof.
Or like
Well,
200,000, something like that.
depends on how much work we have to put into it and what sort of payment situation you're in. You know, if someone is buying rights to something, you could enter into an agreement with a lawyer for them to take a certain percentage of what happens there, or it'll be on an hourly basis, because you might have an agreement that doesn't have a purchase price or a sum of money attached to it. And a lawyer can't take a percentage of that, obviously, so it would have to be hourly. And younger associates, $350 an hour and up, and then partners a lot more and up. Just like a really, really rough number to say out loud.
Right. Okay. This is a good one. Rebecca S. is asking, when adapting an existing IP, like a novel, and the author wants you to write the screenplay, how do you get the proper rights to write that screenplay?
That's a really good question, because I remember years ago being at a writer's conference, and someone had written a script based on material they didn't have the rights to, and I had to painfully tell them, you can't do anything with that script. The thing that's important with it is essentially now you're in the position almost as a producer, and we do this on behalf of some of our writers, actually, where they option a book that they want to adapt. And the important thing is to get what I would call the runway, to have the time. This is when you want a longer option period, because the last thing you want is to be finishing the script with a month left in your option and you don't have time to shop it. The important thing is to get some sort of deal in place that gives you the time you need to shop it, to write it, shop it, and do what you want, because you always have to remember the risk. And we don't always recommend our writer clients to write based on underlying material, just because your script cannot be exploited once you lose the rights. So it's just something to have to think about. Certainly I would never say never, but I just think it's a more tricky situation with the rights, because the moment those rights expire, that script you have can only be used as a sample.
So you should always make sure you have that buttoned up before you spend the time and energy.
Right, because it's a lot of work to obviously adapt it, and you want to make sure.
I think we might have just lost Shayna. So until she comes back, she might be having technical difficulties. I will fire off another question for you. Is everything that you're talking about, I'm sure it's not all of it, but are there certain things that would apply to non-Americans as well, or would you recommend finding someone in that country to look over agreements? How does that work?
I mean, I would probably recommend, depending on where the producers are, if you're optioning, if someone's optioning your script here in the States, I would try to get a lawyer here. That would probably be a recommendation.
Is it possible for a screenwriter to negotiate a partial retention of the copyright of the work, say 1% of it in the writer's LLC's production company name? How would a writer convince a producer to do this?
I think you could reserve certain rights. You can't really like cut up the rights by percentage like that. I think the easiest and cleanest way would be to, if you were planning on writing a book at some point based on the screenplay, or you yourself were developing a digital series or something, I would focus more on reserving rights for yourself rather than trying to get certain pieces of the copyright. Isn't quite the best way to do that.
And the major buyers won't, unless you're like a huge director, or maybe make J.K. Rowling, or maybe a big writer. A buyer's not gonna let you keep any copyright on the film and television rights.
Is there anything specific to animation? Is that a different animal?
It's not entirely different. I mean, it's outside the WGA. There's a different guild, that doesn't have as strong rules and minimums and so forth. But so it's different in that respect. Once you're outside the WGA, there's so many differences just because the WGA has so many complex rules. But in a lot of ways, the fees would be very similar to another type of series, live action.
If you sell a feature script, and at the time there was no talk of a future series, but later the producer wants to develop that script that was then purchased, are you out of luck, or is that something you should have negotiated up front? And if you didn't, you're out, or can you then renegotiate?
I think if you sold all the rights at that moment, you can't, go back to them and say, I want them back. It's kind of, you've let it go and it's all or nothing at that point. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. I mean, hopefully you were thinking ahead of time and you kind of negotiated whatever you wanted from the beginning. Otherwise, it's too late.
Is there an advantage to filing a copyright in a Screenwriters LLC name as opposed to the individual name?
It's funny. We have incredibly talented copyright litigators at our firm, and so every once in a while, I'll ask them complicated copyright questions. There is some possibility under copyright law after a period of time, many decades, even if someone purchases your script, it can come back to you under copyright reversion. There is some sense in which if you copyright with an entity as opposed to an individual, that reversion right goes away. The law is, I think, unclear about it, but that would be the only difference I could think of. As long as you control the rights and can grant them to whoever wants them, that's the main issue.
When you register and then you rewrite, what effect does that have? Do you need to register your next draft, or is it all covered for everything you do to that property?
It's a good question. I mean, I think what you want to do is, the idea is really to protect the work, and so it would be hard for someone to, depending on how many changes, to copyright one draft or to infringe on one draft versus another. But if you do substantially rewrite a script, it makes sense to register it again, but I would have to actually double check on that. When you register for copyright, I think sometimes you can register it and that there's an underlying work. I think there's a way you can register under those circumstances where you're not registering it as a separate product, but with a revision of something else you've registered, I believe.
What's the most interesting case you've handled? Does something come to mind?
All of them. I think you have a few more years on me at the firm, Scott, so I feel like you've had a little more varied experience on this one, because right now for me it's just like they're all great and they're all exciting and I love all of them.
Oh yeah, so put it on me. All right.
Through that one.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we deal with a lot of variety. I'll share two quick stories. One was when I was a producer. That's sort of a reason why I think it's important to protect your work. It's probably the first inkling I should have been an attorney, which is that I was developing a project with a well-known actors production company, and I was based on a book, and I had the relationship with the author. But when I started working with this production company, I figured, what's the big deal? Let them do the official option with the book, because we're all working together, and so they optioned it. And next thing you know, they're trying to push me off the project. Once we sell it to a network, it turned out that the actor's producing partner wasn't quite as nice as the actor, and we won when we kind of were going back and forth on this. It became a contentious situation. And they were trying to give me a very low fee, a producing fee, if the project got made. And he ended up inviting me to breakfast to work it out. And I thought we'd be meeting to work it out. And when we sat down at breakfast, the first thing he said to me was, "You made a mistake by letting us option it," and just made it clear. And that was the whole breakfast was like. And so, it's always the rule to like to take as much control as you can with the project, no matter how nice people are being. Because I always say that everyone in this business is so lovely and nice until money's on the table. And then you see the real people, that what they really are. And a lot of times people can change on a dime. And so that's, important. I do share a lot of my mistakes as a producer with my clients, so that I can tell them what not to do.
Are there somebody had that question, are there common mistakes? I mean, I don't know are there things that you do say to your clients, steer clear of this type of thing, or something that you can offer up writers right now who don't have legal representation? Is there something that you should really kind of keep an eye on, red flags that you should know about?
I think this is kind of broad, but a lot of times people will bring us in and they will have already negotiated material deal terms, like, the money that's on the table, or things that we can't really move once we already have paper that we have to review. So I'll have to remind a lot of my clients, like, bring me in as early as possible, because maybe you're going to lowball yourself, or maybe you're going to forget to ask for this thing, and by the time it gets to me, it's too late for me to push for that. I'll do the best I can to ask for important things and try to work it in, but if we had asked for it from the beginning, it probably would have been an easy thing to incorporate. So my maybe biggest pet peeve or red flag is, like, if it's not something that for 100% certainty what it's supposed to be or what the value is, bring in your resources to help you, or ask around, or find somebody who's been in that position before, and make sure you're not cutting yourself short. So that's it's kind of a red flag and more of a cautionary, get help as much as possible, preferably your lawyer.
Yeah,
That's
kind
a great
of through line of the talk.
Think about what you were saying. It's a great point, and I think I've done this myself when I was on the creative side. It's very easy to kind of wait and sort of avoid. But even with people you're friends with, it's just as important to have something in writing, just so you're on the same page. Sometimes it's even more important with people just because you don't want anything to be a misunderstanding. So there's a tendency to wait and to kind of avoid that situation and wait till things maybe materialize. But it's important to try to deal with these things, because one thing that it does do that I find is that while it's sometimes easier to avoid that conflict, the sooner that you start to negotiate with somebody, you start to see whether they are really someone that you can work with. And sometimes the hardest thing to do is to start that process, realize that person is not reasonable, and walk away. But it's much easier to walk away at an earlier point than later. And so while it's difficult to enter into that conversation or bring a lawyer, and I know we all try to avoid that, it is one of the most helpful things to really see the lay of the land of who you're working with.
Is a contract binding, like an option, just when you sign it, or do you actually need the payment to make that binding as well?
Well, there has to be some sort of the whole basis of contract laws, offer acceptance consideration, which we all learn in our first year of law school. If there hasn't been any consideration, which is typically money or some sort of exchange of something of value, it's like a loose term we can use here. It's not a contract, so it's not valid. But that doesn't mean that oral contracts don't exist, napkin contracts don't exist, handshake contracts don't exist. Those all exist. It just depends on what happened, and if there were a conflict, it would depend on how they're arguing that at court. So if you don't exchange money, it's possible that there is no agreement, but it also depends on the situation.
Okay. And what if you didn't have an agreement? I think I know the answer to this, but or you didn't have a proper agreement, and a project got picked up and then made money. But do you have any recourse to then say, I'm owed some of this money, but you didn't have something in upfront? or are you just out of luck?
If we're talking about a situation in which someone uses your work without the rights, then you absolutely have a right to sue for infringement if they're using your work without a right to exploit it. Absolutely. If there's nothing in writing that gives someone the right to do that, then you have a lot of the leverage.
Okay.
There's an example like of one of the Hangover movies that almost was shut down in the midst of where someone used a tattoo on one of the actors that they didn't have the right to that tattoo, and without any agreement, and then without the typical injunctive relief provision, which prevents someone from actually getting shutting down a movie, that movie was almost shut down or couldn't be released, which is a huge, huge problem for a studio.
Yeah. Wow. How does one go about finding a lawyer? Is it a process of Google or referrals, or do you take, a consult and say, do we mesh as people? How does that whole process work?
I think people approach us from all over the place. I get a lot of people coming to me from assistant Facebook groups. People in the industry, they hear it through word of mouth, or it's a friend of a friend of a friend. I think those referrals are nice because you can, your friend worked with them and they had a good outcome, or they had a good relationship with their lawyer. And you just reach out to that lawyer and you say, this is what I have on the table as my problem. Is this something that you do? And then you can have a typically free consultation. I don't really think anyone in our firm charges for consultations, and to see if you can help with their issue and if you'd be a good match. You got to feel them out too. It's what you should work with someone that you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people are looking for somebody to represent them, are the two of you accepting new clients at this point, or how does that work? Or would they call up the company in general and then be sectioned off to who has a slot available? Or could we say, hey, I want to work with Minda?
You can say you want to work with me. I can help everybody I can help.
I don't mean to leave you out.
Or both of us, because we work together often as well.
We do work actually in groups sometimes. We like to work collaboratively that way. But yeah, no, we're always taking on new clients, and yeah, you can always choose one of us.
And if not, we know someone who might be able to help. If it's not our wheelhouse, we know someone who knows somebody, so we can always try.
That's one of the nice things about our firm, is that when someone comes in on something between all the different people, just talking about our entertainment group, we have so many different specialties that people do, that if from actor deals, that both of us, Minda and I, work on director, writer, producer deals, but then there's people who do film financing, and there's podcast and book deals. It's so we can at least always.
That's a big one that's up and coming too.
Book deals?
Or video game.
Oh, video games. Yeah, for sure. It's booming right now. Yeah.
The most successful division in our group right now.
Wow.
Just from the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. And how does that relationship with client and attorney work then? Do we call you whenever we need something? We say we have a new contract to look over, or is it more like, is there any reason to keep in touch outside of that to build, are you in a relationship building business, or is it more of when I need something, I'm going to call you because you're billing hourly, or however that happens?
Well, I'm not going to bill to talk about your dog or your family. I genuinely like to do that with my clients because I like to know who I'm working with. And it's fun for me to have that sort of relationship interaction with people. I wouldn't be the kind of lawyer I am if I didn't try to build relationships with the people I'm working with. But it depends on your lawyer too, or maybe it depends on your work style. Maybe you want a lawyer that you just send things to and they just get it done. But maybe you want, someone that you can talk to about your upcoming project, and then they can tell you their opinions on it, or tell you, oh, don't forget to remember to do this, if that happens. Not all conversations with lawyers cost money at all. nor should they. So it's what you like to do.
And I should that most of our writer clients are percentage clients. So it's,
right. Numbers from before should not scare you. It's not the case. Totally depends on the situation at hand, and not like that all the time.
Yeah, I just saw someone ask about documentaries, and that's one of our specialties as well. We have one of the best documentary groups in the country. But yeah, no, I mean, both of us, love working with clients. That's why we're on this side as opposed to working at a studio. And particularly, like I said, because I've been on the creative side, I like to try to advise clients, on things that are not always just legal, but some kind of unique circumstance that comes up in this industry that seems to be no other industry can provide, and just kind of help them through it as much as I can. And generally, typically tell them, don't do what I did.
Okay, I'm wrapping up, but just a couple last minute. Does it matter where people live? Can this all be done, I would think, digitally, on the phone? If they're outside of LA or New York, it's fine, right? Yeah.
We play everywhere.
Okay. And do you represent other facets like actors and producers? And great, thank you both again. This was very informative for me, and I'm sure for everybody on here.
And all our info is on www.fkks.com. So you can find us or find anybody else you might want to talk to on there too.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Well, enjoy your weekend. Thanks again for your time. Thanks everybody for being on tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.